And, oh, there we go. Okay. I have the honor of serving as the chair of the Lawrence Public Library Friends and Foundation Board of Directors. A few quick housekeeping notes as usual. In the spirit of tonight's Stolen Focus program, please take a moment to silence or turn off your phones. We want you to be fully present. Thank you. Emergency exits are located to the right and the left of the stage, and restrooms can be found upstairs and on the main level, just past the concession stand. We also want to thank our partners, Liberty Hall and The Raven. Be sure to buy one of Johann Hari's books tonight and get it signed. So the books are being sold back here on the ground level. And we also, as you know, if you have been here before, Liberty Hall has a concession stand, and you are free to patronize that at any time. Please don't forget to tip the bartender. The Beach Author Series began in 2014 thanks to a generous donation endowment from the Ross and Mariana Beach Foundation with matching funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It's a lasting gift that allows the library to welcome celebrated authors to Lawrence. Over the years, the Beach Author Series has given our town unforgettable memories with visits from James McBride, Karen Russell, Geraldine Brooks, George Saunders, Nettie Okorafor, Colson Whitehead, Jacqueline Woodson, and now, this evening, Johann Hari. Yeah. Who has actually come here all the way from London and has never seen Kansas before. So, yeah. Lawrence Public Library is so fortunate to have public funding that covers its core operations. However, there are many more things that the library does, and you can find some or all of them on our website. So we are very grateful, sincerely grateful, for your support, both through your tax dollars and your donations of time, talent, and treasure. Whether it's buying a book at one of our sales or making a donation, your support brings programs like this one to life. From visiting authors and music storytellers to summer reading and Read Across Lawrence, your gifts help the library thrive as a vibrant community learning hub. So please, keep it up. We're really grateful, and it's an important place in our town. The library needs you now more than ever. If you'd like to learn more about giving, visit lplff.org, or feel free to connect with me or our Friends and Foundation Director, Kathleen Morgan. And now, please join me in welcoming Brad Allen, Executive Director of Lawrence Public Library, who will introduce tonight's special guest.
I couldn't hear very well. Did she tell you who I was? I couldn't hear very well back there. My name is Brad Allen. I'm the director of Lawrence Public Library. Thank you so much for coming. Would you give yourselves a hand? It was really important to I don't know if you've noticed, the lights are up a little bit more. It was very important to Johann that he be able to see you all tonight. So thank you for being here and being seen by Johann. So I'm standing between you and Johann, so I'm going to make this really quick. I want to say I'm very excited. I read Stolen Focus close to when it came out. I was just my mind was blown by this book, and I thought it was a really important book. And when we were thinking about who our next beach author would be, I thought this would be a great choice. But it seemed like a long shot. As we mentioned, it's our first international author, which we're very excited about. And so he has a website, and I went to his website and said, do you want to come to Lawrence to talk? And he responded in like an hour and a half. He's like, I've never been to Kansas. Maybe that would be cool. Like, talk to my people. And so and here we are. I'm very surprised and excited and elated that we were able to make something that I wasn't sure we were going to be able to make happen, and that's with the support of our friends at Foundation and the Ross and Marion Beach gift that keeps on giving, where we can have these great events. So now introduction. So I just want to say I'm so excited, and I'm glad you're here. So Johann Hari is a best-selling author. He has 3 New York Times bestsellers. Stolen Focus, you're going to talk about tonight, Chasing the Scream, and yes, Jade, I liked your story about that book. It's very good. And then his most recent, Magic Pill, which is a fascinating book about Ozempic. It was kind of difficult to figure, but we thought Stolen Focus, for being a library, is really important when we think about the power of reading and getting our attention back and reclaiming our ability to think and to think complex thoughts. So he's going to talk about that. Also, fun fact, the Dalai Lama told Johann that he was fat. I give you Johann Hari.
Hello. It is actually true. The Dalai Lama is a total bitch. Who knew? This is not a joke. The Dalai Lama did actually call me fat. Ask me why if you want. I'll tell you later. But I'm very excited to be here. Thank you to Brad and everyone at the library. I'm also very relieved that Jim backstage gave me this kind of microphone because I have this slightly weird thing. Years ago, I gave a TED talk and they made me wear, those headsets that they put on your head. And as the technician put it on my head, he looked at me really intensely and he said, I was talking to him and I said, if you make me wear this, I'm going to feel like Madonna. And he said, you should always feel like Madonna. So now whenever I have to wear one of those things, whatever I'm meant to be talking about, I just want to randomly sing Papa Don't Preach, which turns out people don't want. Who knew? Also, I just want to ask you guys to do me a favor. And I'm 46 years old, and until I was 40, honestly, I thought jet lag was a myth. Now I am 46 years old. When I land in a new time zone, I basically turn into Joe Biden in the first presidential debate, where I'm just sort of confused by the fact that people are moving around. What did you ask me? So to deal with that, I have drunk so much caffeine that I might have a stroke. So if at any point I start to speak too fast, and I know I have a weird Downton Abbey accent as well, if that happens, please wave your hand at me. I will be genuinely glad that you asked me to slow down. Before we start, shall I tell you about why the Dalai Lama called me? I was 24, and I got sent to interview the Dalai Lama, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so I read a lot about him, and I really admire him. Obviously, the resistance to Chinese tyranny, the struggle for Tibetan freedom. But I also think when you interview someone powerful, you should challenge them, if they've done things that are wrong as well. So I did a lot of digging. Turns out the Dalai Lama is quite anti-gay. You shouldn't use the other holes, is an actual quote from the Dalai Lama. And he thinks disabled people are being punished for what they did in a previous life. So I thought, okay, I'll challenge him on that. So the first 20 minutes of the interview, I meant to have an hour with him. The first 20 minutes, we were talking about the stuff we agree on. And then I asked him about this more difficult stuff. And he started pretending he didn't speak English. He was like, I don't understand this. And I'm like, I know you speak English. I just heard you make a speech in English. And I was sort of pushing him. And his goons, I assume that's not their official title, but his people were giving me really dirty looks. I thought they were going to throw me out. So I thought, I'll bring it back to something where we agree. So I said, Your Holiness, you've always been very critical of income inequality in Western countries. And he said, yeah, I don't see why we need so much money. We each only have one stomach. And then said, except you. You clearly have at least 3. And in his defense, I was quite fat at the time. But I was like, it's the Dalai Lama calling me fat. And it wasn't my finest moment in journalism. I said, well, you're quite fat as well. And After I wrote about this, I got the world's first ever Buddhist death threat, which I was really excited by. I wrote back and said, well, you're going to have at least 3 lives as a woodlouse now. But anyway, I don't recommend being told you're fat by a man who's meant to love rocks and blades of grass. It's not good for your self-esteem. Okay, I want to talk to you about a crisis that will not be a surprise to anyone here. We're living in a huge crisis of focus and attention. The average American worker now focuses on any one task for 44 seconds. For every 1 child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem. And the year 2019 was the first year in the history of the American Republic in which a majority of Americans didn't read a single book. And obviously we can see this kind of all around us. It's a sort of nagging deterioration of our attention. And the reason this matters is I would just say to any of you, think about anything you've ever achieved in your life that you're proud of, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is. That thing that you're proud of required a huge amount of sustained focus and attention. Actually, when you look at the evidence on this, it's really clear. Attention is at the heart of all human achievement. Sporting achievement, literary achievement, being a good friend, it all comes from your ability to sustain your attention on one task. And when your ability to pay attention deteriorates, your ability to achieve your goals deteriorates, your ability to solve your problems deteriorates. You feel worse about yourself because you actually are less competent when you can't pay attention. Attention is our superpower. And I came to believe when I looked at the evidence that if that's our superpower, we're kind of surrounded by kryptonite at the moment. And there was an analogy that was suggested to me by someone who spent a lot of time studying this that really helped me. He said, imagine you're driving somewhere and you've really got to get to your destination, it's really important, and someone throws a bucket of mud over your windshield. It doesn't matter what you've got to do when you get to your destination. The first thing you've got to do is get that mud off your windshield, because if you don't get that mud off your windshield, you're not going anywhere. I'm sure everyone here has bigger and more important things to worry about than your attention. But your attention is like the mud on the windshield. If we don't sort this out, it's going to be harder to do everything else. And I spent a lot of time researching this for a kind of quite personal reason. So I could just feel that my own attention was getting worse. With each year that passed, things that require attention that are so important to me, like reading books, watching movies, having proper long conversations, were just getting harder and harder. It was like running up a down escalator. You know what I mean? I could do it, but it was just getting harder and harder. But there was a moment in my life when I realized I really had to think about this more deeply and what's happening to us. So I've got a godson, and when he was 9, he developed this brief and unbelievably cute obsession with Elvis Presley. And he seemed to, I don't know how it even began, and he seemed to genuinely not know that impersonating Elvis was like a kind of cheesy cliche. So I think he was the last person in the history of the world to do a totally sincere version of Jailhouse Rock. It was adorable. And every night when I would tuck him into bed, he got me to tell him the story of Elvis's life over and over again. I skipped over the bit at the end where he dies on the toilet, obviously. And one night I mentioned Graceland, where Elvis lived. And I said that, people go there. And his whole face lit up. And he said, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day? And I said, sure, the way you do with 9-year-olds, knowing, next week you'll want to go to the North Pole or something. And he said, no, do you really mean it? One day you'll take me to Graceland. And I said to him, I absolutely promise. And I didn't think of that moment again for 10 years until so many things had gone wrong. So when he was 15, he dropped out of school. And by the time he was 19, this will sound like an exaggeration. It's absolutely not. He spent all his waking hours alternating between his iPod, his iPhone, his iPad, and his laptop. And his life was just this blur of text messages, YouTube, pornography, Snapchat. And it was like he was almost, only way I can think to describe it is it was like he was spinning at the speed of Snapchat. Do you know what I mean? Where nothing kind of still or serious could touch him. And one day we were sitting on my sofa in London, and all day I was trying to have a conversation with him. And I just couldn't. I just couldn't get any traction with anything. He was just on to the next thing. And he's very intelligent. And to be totally honest with you, I wasn't that much better, right? I was staring at my own devices. And I was sitting there and I was so frustrated with him, with myself. And I suddenly remembered this moment all these years before. And I said to him, hey, let's go to Graceland. And he looked at me completely blankly. He didn't remember this thing all these years before, but I reminded him. And I said, this is no way to live. Let's break this numbing routine. Let's get out of here. Let's go on a road trip all over the South. But I thought ahead. I said, but you've got to promise me one thing, which is that when we go, if we do this, you'll leave your phone in the hotel during the day, because there's no point going if you're just going to look at your phone the whole time. And he thought about it. He wasn't happy living the way he was living. And he said, let's do it. And so 2 weeks later, we touched down in New Orleans. And a couple of weeks after that, we got to the gates of Graceland. And has anyone here been to Graceland? You guys, yeah, lots of you have been, right? So you know this. This is even before COVID. This must have been 2017, I think. 2018, maybe. When you arrive at the gates of Graceland now, there's no human being to show you around. What happens is you arrive, and they hand you an iPad. And you put in earbuds. This is not a joke. And the iPad shows you around. It says, go left, go right. Every room you go in, it tells you a story about that room. And every room you go in, there's an image of that room on the iPad in front of you. So it has this slightly weird effect that people just walk around Graceland staring at their iPads. And I'm walking around, and I'm getting a little bit kind of pissed off, because I'm like, wow, we traveled a long way to get here, but no one's looking at it, right? And we got to the jungle room, which was Elvis's favorite room. It's full of loads of fake plants, which is why it's called the jungle room. They've kept it exactly as it was. And I'll never forget them. There was a middle-aged Canadian couple next to us. And the man turned to his wife and he said, honey, this is amazing. Look, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right. And I laughed like you did, because I thought, oh, he's kidding. And I just stood and watched them, and they were swiping back and forward. And I leaned forward and I said, but sir, there's an old-fashioned form of swiping you could do. It's called turning your head, because you realize we're in the jungle room. You don't have to look at it on the internet. It's literally all around us. And they looked at me like I was insane and backed out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat, because from the moment we landed, he just could not stop. He couldn't keep his promise to leave it in the hotel room. And I went up to him. I did this thing that's never a good idea with teenagers. I tried to grab the phone out of his hands, but he's stronger than me. And I said to him, look, I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing that you'll miss out. You're not showing up in your own life. You're not present at the events of your own existence. And he stormed off, and I walked around Memphis on my own that day. And I found him that night in the Heartbreak Hotel where we were staying across the street. And he was sitting by the huge guitar-shaped swimming pool looking at his phone. And I went up to him and I apologized for getting so angry. And he didn't look up, but he said, I know something's really wrong and I don't know what it is. And I realized in that moment we came away to get away from this problem of distraction. But there was nowhere to escape to. It's everywhere. It's the air we all breathe. That's when I thought, oh, right, I've been angry with him and I've been angry with myself, but there's something going on here that's deeper than me and him, right? These are really big changes, what's going on. So that's why I spent the next 3 years going on this big journey all over the world to really deeply study the science of attention. I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts. I did a really deep dive in their research. I went from Miami to Moscow to Melbourne, not just to cities that began with the letter M. I don't know why I did that. And what I learned is there's actually scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make your attention worse. And loads of the factors that can make your attention worse have been hugely rising in recent years. And they range very widely. Surprisingly, well, obviously we think about technology, and that's a big factor. But actually, they range very widely from the food we eat to the sleep we don't get to the way our kids' schools are designed, the way our offices are designed, to air pollution. There's a very broad range of factors that are harming our attention. But the key thing to understand is your attention did not collapse. Your attention has been stolen from you by some really big and powerful forces. But once we understand what those forces are, we can begin to protect ourselves and our kids and reclaim our brains. So I'll start by talking about one of the 12 causes that will be playing out, I'm pretty sure, for everyone in this room today to some degree. I went to interview one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, an amazing man named Professor Earl Miller, who's at MIT. And he said to me, look, there's one thing you need to understand about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limitation of the human brain. The human brain has not changed significantly in 40,000 years. It's not going to change on any time scale any of us are going to see. You can only think about one or two things at a time. But what's happened is we've fallen for a kind of mass delusion. The average teenager now believes they can follow 7 forms of media at the same time, and the rest of us are not that far behind them. So what happens is scientists like Professor Miller, scientists all over the world, get people into labs, younger people and older people, and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time, and they monitor them. And what they discover is always the same. You can't think about or do more than one thing at a time, but what you can do is juggle very quickly between tasks. So you're like, what did you just ask me? What is this message on WhatsApp? What does it say on the TV over there? What is this message on Facebook? Wait, what did you ask me again? So we're constantly juggling, right? And it turns out that juggling comes with a really big cost. The technical term for it, it's one everyone should know, is the switch cost effect. When you switch between tasks, even when you don't realize you're doing it, but when you switch between tasks, that comes with a cost. You make more mistakes, you remember much less of what you do, you're much less creative. But I remember when I learned that from Professor Miller and other scientists, thinking, okay, I get it. You can kind of feel intuitively that's true. But I thought, that's a small effect, right? It's not a big deal. When you look at the science, it's incredible how big an effect it is. So I'll give you an example of a small study that's backed by a wider body of evidence. You know Hewlett-Packard, the printer company? They got a scientist in to study their workers, and he split them into 2 groups. And the first group was told, okay, for today, just get on with your task, whatever it is, you're not going to be interrupted by email or phone calls, just do what you've got to do. And the second group was told, get on with your task, whatever it is, but at the same time, you've got to answer a heavy load of email and phone calls, so pretty much how we all live, right? And at the end of it, the scientist, Dr. Glenn Miller, tested the IQ of both groups. The group that had not been interrupted scored, on average, 10 IQ points higher than the group that had been interrupted. Give you a sense of how big an effect that is. If we all sat down now and smoked a fat spliff and got stoned, we smoked cannabis, our IQs would go down by 5 points. So being constantly interrupted in the way we are is twice as bad for your intelligence as smoking cannabis. You'd be better off sitting at your desk, smoking a fat spliff, and doing one thing at a time than you would sitting at your desk, being, not smoking a spliff and being constantly interrupted. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. You're better off neither smoking a spliff nor being interrupted. But you begin to see why Professor Miller said to me, we are living in a perfect storm of cognitive degradation as a result of being constantly interrupted. There's a different study, one that really haunts me, by a guy called Professor Michael Posner at the University of Oregon. Really simple study. It found that if you're interrupted, so if any of you got a text, you're actually being all very disciplined, by the way, I'm impressed, but if any of you felt a little buzz in your pocket now, and you had a text message, it'd be very normal to think, oh, I can glance at that text message, it'll take me 5 seconds to read it, then I'll go back to listening to this weird British guy, that's easy enough, right? What's that? It's 5 seconds. Professor Posner discovered if you're interrupted by something as simple as a text message, it takes you, on average, 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus you had before you were interrupted. But most of us never get 23 minutes without being interrupted, so we're constantly operating at this lower level of cognitive capacity. And this, I think, is obviously massively affecting our ability to do provide the deepest form of attention, which is reading books, right? There's been an enormous collapse in the reading of books, and the more complex the books are, the more their readership has gone down. To a staggering degree, actually. It's really like a fall off a cliff. And it was so moving being in the library. I was just saying to the guys before that, when Brad took me into the library, the first thing I saw was a dad reading to his son. And you see in that moment the formation of, the fancy term would be, a kind of linear consciousness, right? What are you saying when you read a book? I'm going to think about one thing. Let's say if you read a novel or one of my books, what it's going to do is it's going to take you 8-9 hours. I'm going to set aside 8 or 9 hours to think about one thing. You can't read a book when you're doing loads of other things. It's impossible. I'm going to think about this one thing. Often it will involve imagining what it's like to be another human being. And those of us who read a lot, and I'm sure everyone here is in that position, we like to imagine, oh, that makes you a better person. But actually, there's a lot of scientific evidence that it leads to all sorts of benefits. There's a guy called Professor Raymond Ma, who's at one of the universities in Toronto, who I interviewed there, who's done a huge amount of research on this. I can explain why if you want the detail, but just to give you the headlines. The more you read, particularly if you read fiction, the more you develop empathy for other people. Fiction is like a kind of empathy gym. You're imagining what it's like to be another person. And just like if you go to the gym a lot and lift things, which I don't, as the Dalai Lama will tell you, but if you go to the gym and lift things a lot, that strength isn't only useful in the gym. You leave and you have to pick up a big heavy box or something, it's going to be helpful there. In the same way, if you're doing the empathy gym of reading fiction, when you then are encountering people and you want to empathize with them, or maybe even involuntarily, you will empathize with them much more. You will imagine what it's like to be them much better. There's also lots of evidence that we read on screens completely differently to when we read a physical book. There's a really fascinating woman called Professor Anne Mangan at Stavanger in Norway. I was speaking to someone here who's spent a lot of time in Norway. And she's done a lot of the research on this. It's really interesting. And it helps us to understand why we remember much less of what we read on screens compared to if you read it on a printed page. So when you read on paper in English, you read left to right. So if you looked at my book now, you'd read left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right. If you were given the text of my book on a screen, you would not read it that way. On screens, we read in a Z shape. You read the first line left to right, and then you scan the text ahead for words. They can do this, obviously, they scan people's eyes. And you scan for keywords, you scan down, and then if you're interested, you go back to the top. But it's a less attentive, less linear form of attention, which is much less powerful. I was obviously really interested as well in thinking about, we're talking here about the problems of distraction. So I think, well, what's the opposite of distraction, right? And there's a really interesting body of science about this. Everyone here will have experienced something called a flow state, even if you don't know this term. A flow state is when you're doing something and you just totally get into it. And it's like your sense of time falls away, your sense of ego falls away, and you're just in it. And then you look at your watch, you're like, whoa, is it 4 o'clock? Where did the day go, right? And different people get into flow doing different things. Some people it's brain surgery, some people it's making bagels, whatever. For me, it's writing, right? But I'm sure we all have a thing that happens. The way one rock climber described flow is when you're climbing a rock and you get into flow, it's like you are the rock you're climbing, right? And flow states are a really important form of attention because they're both the deepest form of attention that human beings can provide, and once you get into them, the easiest form of attention to provide. When you're in flow, it's not an effort. It's not like, oh God, how do I do this? So obviously I wanted to understand, whoa, if we all have this ability, if we've all got this kind of gusher of attention within us, where do we drill to get it? How do we get it, right? And so I went to interview the man who studied flow states for 60 years, first person to ever use the phrase, an amazing man named Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It took me so long to learn how to say his name. I'm going to say it several times. Totally amazing man. I went to interview him. I actually did the last interview he ever did because he died soon after, not because of me. He discovered loads of things, but to help everyone here, I would give you the kind of headline, which is that if you want to maximize your chances of getting into a flow state, there's no guarantee, but if you want to really increase the odds, there are 3 things you can do. The first thing is you've got to set aside a significant amount of time to do just one thing. If you're trying to do 2, 3, 4 things, you won't get into flow. The second thing is you've got to choose a goal that is meaningful and important to you. You've got to believe that what you're doing matters. Attention evolved to attach to meaning, right? The more meaningful something is, the easier it is to pay. We all know that with books. If you gave me a book about, I don't know, American politics, I would find that easy to read. It's a subject that interests me. If you gave me a book about American football, I would really struggle to read it. I don't understand it. It's completely bad. Sorry, I don't mean to insult your national religion, but I don't understand it no matter how many times people explain it, and I don't care, right? So the more meaningful something is to you, the easier it is to flow. And the third thing you can do, and this seems, when I learned it, a little bit counterintuitive to me, actually. It will help if you push yourself to the edge of your abilities. Flow begins at the edge of your comfort zone. So let's imagine that you're a rock climber, like a medium talent rock climber. You don't just want to climb over your garden wall. That's too easy. You won't get into flow doing that. Equally, you don't want to suddenly try and climb Mount Everest. That's too much. You'll be overwhelmed. You want to climb a slightly higher and a harder rock wall than the one you did last time. So you do these 3 things. Set aside time to pursue one goal. Make sure it's a meaningful goal. Invest it with meaning. And push yourself to the edge of your abilities. And you will activate your deepest powers of attention. But even as I say that, you'll begin to notice right at step 1, set aside time to do just one thing. How many of us struggle with that, right? So you begin to see one of the reasons we're being undermined. I'm going to come to a lot of the solutions soon, but I want to talk quickly about 2 of the other factors that are really harming our attention. One is sleep. American children now sleep on average 85 minutes less than they did in 1945. That is a staggering decline. There's been an enormous fall in sleep. And I spent a lot of time discussing this with Dr. Charles Czeisler at Harvard Medical School, who's one of the leading experts on sleep in the world. He's advised everyone from the Boston Red Sox to the US Secret Service on sleep. And he explained to me, along with lots of other scientists, I think it really helped. The whole time you're awake, your brain is building up something called metabolic waste. One scientist calls it brain cell poop, which helped me to understand it. It's building up in everyone now. The longer you stay awake, the more it builds up. It's why if you stay awake for 19 hours, which doesn't sound like much, your attention deteriorates as much as if you'd got legally drunk. And when you go to sleep, a watery fluid washes through your brain, your cerebral spinal fluid channels open up, and this brain cell poop is carried out of your brain down into your kidneys, eventually out of your body. Your brain cleans itself during sleep. If you don't get 8 hours of sleep a night, your brain is literally clogged up. It operates more slowly. Over time, it's why people who sleep less are much more likely to get dementia. And we're all walking around in this kind of clogged state a lot of the time. You can ask me more about why that happened and what we can do about it if you want. Also, the food we eat is profoundly affecting our ability to focus and pay attention. And I want to say this with no sense of superiority. One of the lowest points of my life was just before Christmas in 2009. I went to my local branch of KFC in East London, and I went in, and it was lunchtime, and I said my standard order, which is so disgusting I won't repeat it to you. And the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, Johann, I'm really glad you're here." And I was like, "All right." And he said, "Wait a minute." And he went off behind where they fry the chicken and everything. And he came back with every member of staff and a massive Christmas card in which they'd written, "To our best customer." And one of the reasons my heart sank is I thought, but this isn't even the fried chicken shop I come to the most. What's happening? So, no sense of superiority, but it turns out this way we eat is not, we all know about the obesity problems, it's not just having that effect. So Dale Pinnock, who's one of the leading nutritionists in Europe, explained to me, let's imagine you have the standard American and increasingly British breakfast, which is, say you have a sugary cereal, or you have toasted white bread, right, with butter on it. What that does is it releases a huge amount of energy into your brain really fast. It releases a lot of glucose, which feels great. You're like, whoa, I'm awake, I'm ready for the day. But it's released so much energy so fast that you'll get to your office a few hours later, or your kid will get to their school desk, and you'll have a huge energy crash. And then you get what's called brain fog, where you just can't think very clearly until you have another sugary, carby snack, and then you get another spike, and then you get another crash. The way Dale Pinnock put it to me is the way we eat puts us on a roller coaster of energy spikes and energy crashes, energy spikes and energy crashes throughout the day, which gives you these long patches of brain fog. Whereas if, for example, you had for breakfast, I don't know, granola with blueberries, I know it sounds disgusting, what that does is it releases energy very steadily. You don't get those unnatural patches of brain fog the whole time, or for periods throughout the day. So you begin to see how lots of elements of our environment, and there are lots of others, are causing this crisis and causing a kind of perfect storm when it comes to attention. So obviously, I'm not interested in just talking about problems, right? I don't want to sit there and go, oh, we've got these problems. And I'm interested in understanding problems so we can solve them. And the good news is there are solutions to these problems. For all of the 12 factors that are harming our attention, I think there are 2 levels at which we've got to deal with them. I started to think of them as defense and offense. There are loads of things that we can all do as individuals to protect our attention and our kids' attention immediately. So I go through loads in the book, but I'll give you an example of 2 that you could all do literally today. When you leave here, Google the words K-safe. It's the letter K and a safe, and order one. I should have bought shares in this company before my book came out because they sell much more now. It's simple. It's a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial, and it will lock your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day, right? And once you push the button, it's locked, you can't get your phone. I mean, if there was an emergency, you could hit it with a hammer, I guess, but then you've got to buy another K-safe. Everyone here who's got kids, we spend our time shouting at our kids to get off their phones while looking at our own phones. I would really recommend buy a K-safe and just begin 20 minutes a day. All of you put your phone in the K-safe and have to look into each other's eyes like in the olden times. It's really hard at first, but it's really contagious because the pleasures of knowing that someone is actually listening to you and you're listening to them is so much greater than whatever shitty Instagram update you're going to have to wait 20 minutes for, right? When you start to get a taste of getting attention back, it is contagious. The other thing I would recommend you do immediately is all go online and download an app called Freedom. Very simple app. You can sync it to your laptop and your phone. It's very, very easy to do. So let's say you were addicted to eBay or Pornhub or whatever your weakness is. There are a few guilty looks in the room there. Whatever your weakness might be, you can tell the app, don't let me go onto that website for the next 5 minutes, the next day, whatever it is. And once you push the button, when you go to that website, it's a little bird saying you've been set free. And you go and do something else, right? I have social media permanently blocked on my phone. I use it sometimes on my laptop, but never on my phone. Because I don't want people to say at my funeral, Johann spent a lot of time on Instagram. That was his thing, right? That's not the life I want to have. So I'd recommend doing those 2 things. There's lots of other things you can do immediately as an individual. But I want to really level with you because I don't think most people who are communicating about attention are being honest with people. I am passionately in favor of these individual changes. They will make a real difference to your life. I do them. I obviously recommend them. On their own, they will not fully solve this problem because this didn't happen because you had bad habits or your kids had bad habits or because I had bad habits. This happened because of some very big and powerful forces. And at some point, we have to go on offense against those forces. And that sounds weird, but there's an example in the life of everyone except the youngest people in this room when we did that, and I'll talk to you about it in a minute. So obviously, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and I interviewed the people who designed key aspects of the world in which we now live. And the thing that most struck me about them was how sick with guilt they feel about what they've done. Give you an example. There's a guy called Dr. James Williams who has robbed a lot of your time. He helped invent Gmail and made it much more addictive. And one day, he was sitting at a conference, speaking at a conference, where the audience was literally the people who designed the stuff your kids use every day. And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we're creating, please put up your hand. And nobody put up their hand. And he's like, I'm done. And he quit. And became a really important philosopher of attention and a great person. So people who designed this machine explained to me how it works. And at first, honestly, I thought it sounded both too simplistic and almost kind of conspiratorial. And they're like, no, we did this, right? Trust us, we've been in the rooms where it's designed. And then you look at the evidence. So if any of you now opened Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, which I refuse to call X, any of those apps, if you open them now, please don't, but if you did, and you began to scroll, those companies would begin to make money out of you immediately in two ways. The first way is really obvious. You see advertising. Okay, we all know how that works. The second way is much more important. Everything you ever do on these apps is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out who you are and what makes you tick. So let's say that you've ever indicated on these apps, even in your so-called private messages, that you like, I don't know, Donald Trump, Bette Midler, and you told your mom you just bought some diapers. Okay, it's going to figure out, adjustment. It's going to figure out, okay, if you like Donald Trump, you're probably conservative. If you like Bette Midler and you're a man, you're probably gay. No disrespect to any straight men who like Bette Midler, I don't really believe you. And if you just bought some diapers, you've got a baby, right? These apps, if you've been using them for any length of time, know tens of thousands of things like this about you. They know far more about you than your neighbor, because your neighbor's not reading the messages you write at 3 a.m, right? Your neighbor's not scanning your eyeballs for how long you look at each thing, right? They are building up enormous amounts of data about you. And they're doing that for several reasons, but the most important is to figure out what to show you next to keep you scrolling. For a very simple reason. Every time you open the app and begin to scroll, they begin to make money. The longer you scroll, the more money they make. Every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears. Every time your kid opens the app and begins to scroll, they begin to make money. The longer your kid scrolls, the more money they make. Every time your kid closes the app, they lose that revenue stream. So all this genius in all this genius in Silicon Valley, all this AI, all these algorithms, when they're applied to social media, are designed to do one thing and one thing only, to figure out how to get you to open the app as often as possible and scroll as long as possible. That's it, right? Just like the head of KFC may be a perfectly nice person, I'm sure he or she is, but all they care about is how often did you go to KFC this week and how big was the bucket you bought. All these companies care about is how often did you open the app, how long did you scroll. The longer you scroll, the better it is for them. So they have designed an unbelievably sophisticated machinery to hack and frack your attention. And they are getting better and better at it. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is than Facebook, right? Now imagine the next crack-like iteration of TikTok that's being currently designed. As my friend Tristan Harris, who also worked at the heart of this machine, said when he testified before the Senate, in this environment, you can try having self-control, but every time you do, there are 10,000 engineers on the other side of the screen working very hard to undermine your self-control. So don't blame yourself and your kids if you're struggling with that. These people are really good at what they do. And that is having a disastrous effect on our attention. Before I get to the solution, I just want to talk about another disastrous effect it's having, one that we're seeing play out every single day across the world. It's not just our individual attention that's being destroyed, it's our collective attention. And the most precious form of collective attention is democracy. Our ability to listen to each other, to talk to each other, to take collective decisions that we may not agree with but that we respect. And it's not a coincidence that there is a crisis of democracy everywhere in the world. When countries as different as Britain, Brazil, and Burma are all having very similar crises, that tells you there's an underlying similar factor. And if you want to understand it, it's very simple. Picture 2 teenage girls who go to the same party and go home on the same bus. And they both open TikTok. And one of them makes a video. They go, "That was such a great party. We danced all night to Ariana Grande. I loved it." The algorithms are always scanning the kind of words you use, and it'll put that video into a few people's feeds. Now imagine the other girl opens that video and says, "Annabelle was an absolute skank at that party, and her boyfriend's a prick." I don't know if teenagers still use the word skank. Do they? You're young. Do you still use the word skank? No. He looks puzzled. Whatever the equivalent of skank is in contemporary Kansas. But they do an angry denunciation of everyone who is at the party. The algorithms are scanning for the kind of words you use. It will put that video into far more people's feeds for a very simple reason. There's a lot of evidence for this. Human beings will stare longer at things that make us angry and upset than they will at things that make us feel good. The technical term for this is negativity bias. If you've ever seen a car crash on the highway, you know what I mean. You stared a lot longer at the mangled wreck on the side of the road than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side, right? This is very deep in human nature, negativity bias. A 10-week-old baby will stare longer at a hostile face than a smiling face. It's always been part of our psychology. I'd like to think you think what I'm saying is interesting, but if those guys at the back up there started having a fight, you would all turn and watch their fight, right? And that's for a very deep evolutionary reason. Our ancestors who didn't turn and look at the fight got attacked, right? They didn't get to be our ancestors. That's always been part of our psychology. But when it combines with algorithms that learn you intimately, it has a disastrous effect. So think about that dynamic, those two teenage girls on the bus, where the nice girl gets muffled, not many people hear from her, and the nasty girl gets pushed to the front and given a loudspeaker, right? Now imagine that happening to a whole country, except you don't have to imagine it because it's happening everywhere in the world, right? And we all know the results. And I don't just mean, by the way, the current president. It's happening on all sides of politics. We're all becoming nastier. We're all being rewarded for being mean and cruel, and that's a phenomenon on the left and the right. This is not a partisan point, as you see when it's happening in democracies all over the world. And so a situation where 60% of people get their news from algorithm-based social media, and those algorithms are geared towards showing you the meanest, nastiest content, that is not compatible with democracy in the long term. Right? We cannot have a democracy where we hate each other all the time. We always say and hear the worst about each other. And it's why democracy is in danger everywhere at the moment. So I want to talk about what we can do about that. And when you hear that, it's easy to think, well, we're just trapped in the matrix. This is just a nightmare. What can we do? But there's an example of that most people here will remember, although we won't think about it in this context, of where people collectively took on something that was screwing up our attention and replaced it with something that didn't. So when I was a kid, the only form of gasoline you could buy here in the US, everywhere in the world, was leaded gasoline, right? Can you remember the smell of it, right? And obviously, if lead is in gasoline, it was in the fumes, it was in the air, everyone was breathing in huge amounts of lead. And it turns out breathing in lead is terrible for your brain, and particularly bad for children's ability to pay attention. By the way, in the 1920s, when they first invented leaded gasoline, there was an amazing woman scientist called Dr. Alice Hamilton, who said, but if we use leaded gasoline, this will be a disaster. It will cause loads of mental degeneration and violence because it lowers your inhibition to be violent. If you have exposure to lead. Let's use this other form of gasoline. And she was mansplained out of the room. They ignored her. They launched leaded gasoline, and we have this disaster for 50 years. So, but then by the time you got to the 70s and 80s, it was really clear that Alice Hamilton had been right and that it was screwing us all up. So what happened was a group of ordinary moms, what at the time were called housewives, banded together and said, well, why are we allowing this? Why are we allowing the lead industry to screw up our kids' brains? And it's important to notice what they didn't say. They didn't say, so let's ban cars, let's go back to the horse and cart, let's all join the Amish, right? That's not what they said. They said, okay, let's ban this specific form of gasoline and replace it with a different kind of gasoline that doesn't screw up our kids' brains. And these moms fought like hell for all of us, right? And it was a really hard battle, and it followed the pattern of all successful campaigns that was described by Mahatma Gandhi. First they ignored them, then they laughed at them, then they fought them, then they won. As everyone here knows, there's no more leaded gasoline in the world. As a result, every child in this city and every child in this country is 5 IQ points higher than they would have been, according to the Centers for Disease Control. That's an incredible transformation that those moms won for us. But I think it's also a really important model for what we can do now. In addition to protecting ourselves and our kids at an individual level, we've got to take on the forces that are doing this to us. And obviously I wanted to understand what's the equivalent of the lead in the leaded gasoline for social media, right? And let them explain to me, the problem is not social media. The problem is the current business model of social media, which is very simple. Like I say, the longer you scroll, the more money they make, and therefore they show you more enraging content because that keeps you scrolling for longer, right? That's the problem. But there are other business models for social media. Asa Raskin, who designed a key part of how the internet works, said to me, solution is very simple. The current business model, the fancy term for it is surveillance capitalism. You seem to get the product for free, but in return, you pay with your attention and your democracy. That's just like lead in leaded gasoline. Ban it. Don't allow it. Right? You don't let your kid be exposed to lead. Don't let them be exposed to this business model. And I remember saying to him and lots of other people who said this to me, okay, but what happens, let's imagine we do that. What happens the next day when I open Facebook? Does it just say, sorry guys, we've gone fishing? He said, of course not. What would happen is they would move to a different business model. And almost everyone in this room will have experience of those two different business models. One of them is subscription. We all know how that works. You pay a certain amount to Netflix. In return, you get access. The key thing is that then all the incentives change. At the moment, you are not the customer of TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Your attention is the product they sell to the real customer, the advertiser, right? They've got customer service departments. We can't phone them. Try it. They won't talk to you because you're not the customer, right? But under a subscription-based model, suddenly you are the customer. Suddenly they're not going, how do we hack and invade Annie to keep her scrolling all day? Suddenly they're saying, what does Annie want? What makes Annie feel good? Turns out Annie feels good when she meets up with her friends offline. Let's design our app to maximize actual social contact. My friends in Silicon Valley could design that tomorrow, right? But if the incentives aren't there, they're not going to do it, the financial incentives. Or the third model is one that everyone here knows. Think about the sewers. Before we had sewers, we had feces in the street, people got cholera, it was terrible. So we all pay to build and maintain the sewers together, right? You own the sewers in Lawrence with everyone else in this city, I own the sewers in London, right? It might be that like we own the sewage pipes together because we don't want to get cholera. We might want to own the information pipes together because we're getting the equivalent of cholera for our attention, for our children's attention, and for our politics. But if you think about those models, those alternative models, these companies will never do that on their own, right? Any more than the lead industry was going to go, guys, we're screwing up people's brains, let's stop doing it. That's not how it works. They had to be made to do it. We can make them do it. And the good news about this is that the potential constituency of support for rebelling against this system is essentially everyone except Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, right? I wrote my book on this, I'm very proud to say, the only book that has ever been praised by both Hillary Clinton and Tucker Carlson, right? And I don't think there will ever be a book that can say that about again, right? There are very few issues on which all of us are united in this country about the crisis we are facing. All the smoke alarms are going off. We absolutely can deal with this and the other factors that are doing this, but in addition to individual behavior, it will require collective action because this is a collective problem. And I think that leaded gasoline example is a really, really good example. I want to end by talking about something a bit different that relates to attention. That also makes me optimistic, and it's something kind of beautiful that I saw. So one of the heroes of my book is a woman called Lenore Skenazy. Lenore was born in Chicago in the 60s. And from when she was 5 years old, Lenore used to leave the house on her own every morning and walk to school on her own. she would bump into all the other kids, because at that time in this country, every child in the United States walked to school on their own. Everyone here who's Lenore's age will remember that, right? And when school ended, she would play with her friends for a few hours, and they would go home when they were hungry. By the time Lenore was a mom in the 90s, she was living in Crown Heights in New York, that had ended. You were expected to deliver your child like a package to the school every morning, and you were expected to be waiting for them at the end of the day, right? In fact, just before COVID hit, only 12% of American children ever played outside without an adult supervising them. And Lenore felt like this childhood that had existed for all of human history until like 30 years ago, the loss of it meant something. And she looked a lot at the science of it. And it turns out when children play freely with other children, so free play is when they're not directed and there's not an adult telling them what to do or mediating, that is when you learn all sorts of elements of attention. It's where you learn, crucially, how to be confident. You climb the tree, you get up, you get really panicked, you've gone too far, you feel really nervous, but you get down to the bottom. It's these small challenges that happen in free play that keep you centered and that make you centered and confident. If you don't get those challenges, you become really anxious in your life, you don't feel competent, you don't feel you can do things, and anxiety is the enemy of attention, as we all know, right? There's many other things. When you play freely, you learn what interests you and what excites you, which is really important for attention, because again, you learn what's meaningful to you. So Lenore was like, okay, the solution to this is kind of obvious. I'll let my kids out to play. But if you're the only parent doing it, your kid gets scared, you get anxious, and often people call the cops, right? So she said, okay, we've got to do something different. So she set up a group called Let Grow. It's letgrow.org. I really recommend checking it out. It's very simple. They go to whole schools and whole neighborhoods and persuade everyone to give their kids increasing levels of independence that lead up to playing outside again. And they transform whole neighborhoods. It's an incredible thing to see. And I went to see lots of their programs, but one I'll never forget, this was just before COVID, I went to their program in Rhode Island, and I'll never forget one of the kids I spoke to. He was a 14-year-old boy, a tall, strapping 14-year-old boy, taller than me. Until this program had begun in his neighborhood 9 months before, he had never been outside his house without an adult. And I said to him, what did you do when the program began? And he said, oh, me and my friends, we went to the local park and we played basketball. I was like, oh. And then he said, and there's some woods behind the park, and we started to go into the woods. I was like, oh. And he said, and then we realized there's no cell phone reception in the woods, and we still went there. I was like, wow. And I said, what did you do in the woods? And he said, we built a fort, and now we're going to build a castle. And seeing his face and the confidence and the pride he had at having done something himself was so moving. And I thought about all the kids I know who never get that. We've taken that away from them. We can hardly be surprised they're obsessed with playing Fortnite if that's the only place they ever get to explore anything or achieve anything. And Lenore was with me when I was speaking to that kid, and when he left later that day, she said to me, think about human history. For all of human history, kids went out and they explored, they mapped the territory, they figured out how things worked. And then in one generation, we took that all away from them. But that boy, given a tiny little bit of freedom, what did he do? He went with his friends and he built a fort. Because this is so deep in human nature. And I feel this insight is true of so many of the things about attention that I've talked about. I'm sure there's nothing I've said that has struck you like rocket science, right? It's not like explaining some new thing that you're like, wow, I didn't think of the world that way before. All I'm doing is telling you things you know in your heart already. But we're living in an environment that is militating against our better insights for ourselves and our children. But the good news is all these changes are really recent. Human beings had the axe for 1.2 million years before anyone said, guys, shall we put a handle on this axe? The entire internet has existed for less than 10,000 days. Every single one of the changes I've described I remember the world before them. Most of the people here remember the world before them, right? These are not acts of nature. They are decisions by small numbers of people so they can become even richer at the expense of all of us. We don't have to allow that for our children, but it requires a real shift in psychology. We need to stop being angry with ourselves and our children and start being angry with the people who did this to us. And we need to realize, we need to realize we are not medieval peasants begging at the table of King Musk and King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from their table. We are the free citizens of democracies, hard-won democracies, and we own our own minds. And together we can take them back if we want to. Thanks. I was saying to Brad before, it's a real problem for British people in the United States that British people cannot acknowledge applause in a nice, friendly way. So I was saying to Brad and the other guys before, if you ever look at videos of, it's worth Googling, there's images of the Queen when people would applaud her, so what she would do. So if people were clapping, she'd go, yes. With a completely blank facial expression, which is how, as a British person, you're meant to say it. But now, because I spend so much time here, I'm like, thanks, you guys. So, but yes, so I think Brad has some questions. Thank you.
You're getting really good at smiling at people when they clap at you. You're improving by the minute.
All right.
It's much better than 2 hours ago. So now we've come to our question and answer. I have some questions.
Hooray.
So we had ask Johann a question back there, and some of you have done that. I was going to stand back here, so it was like...
Well, you're like the Wizard of Oz.
Johann, I'll ask you a question. But Kathleen told me to behave and to come out here. So it's my handler, Kathleen Morgan. You know what? Why doesn't everybody give Kathleen Morgan a round of applause?
All right.
I'm not certain if we would all be here without Kathleen tonight. I mean, honestly, I told Johann she is my handler and helps me do my best.
There was a British politician called Mo Molam who once said to me, every meeting you ever go to, you'll meet two people. The first person you'll meet is the man who takes the credit for it, and the second person you'll meet is the woman who did the actual work.
And that's why I thank Kathleen.
Sorry, you also did work, to be fair.
How rude. Okay, anyway. I asked Kathleen made me come up here and read these. I'll have you know. Anyway. Well, yeah, she should be doing it, right? Anyway. Okay, here we go. You ready? Are you ready? Lightning round.
Do you want to
okay,
do one at a time, or you want to give them all at the same time, or what do you want to do? I'll do it however you want to do it.
I'm gonna ask my question first because
I'm very bad at lightning rounds, by the way. Tell me to be faster. Go on. Go.
So I read this book. It came out in 2022. Is that right? So the book is 2 to 3 years old.
2021 maybe even. Yeah.
So and you researched it a good bit before, and I'm just curious if you have thought, has anything in the research that you did or the way that social media works changed in any way that you know of for the better at all?
Well, what's happening for the better is there's an enormous movement of people saying you can't do this to me and my children anymore. So there's an people know my friend Johann Hari is doing a huge amount of work on this, but I recommend, the movement for a smartphone-free childhood. I was just in Australia where they've banned all social media for under 16s. There's all sorts of huge positive changes that are happening. Now, cell phone bans on schools are becoming standard, and there's loads of research on this. I'll tell you the really shocking outcome of when you ban smartphones in schools. Test results massively improve, bullying massively goes down, kids pay attention, and they play with each other in the playground. I know it's not like a shocking headline, but the science on this could not be clearer. So yeah, there's loads of positive changes in the society. Within social media, the TikTok algorithm is getting better and better at honing in on what makes you, since then, they don't tell us the exact, it's like the secret herbs and spices in KFC. They don't tell us what they are, but we can kind of figure it out. So we know that they're getting better and better at tracking people, and we know that people are using it for longer and longer. So the forces of invasion and the forces of counter-invasion are both getting stronger, and one's going to prevail.
You know, my friend worked at KFC, and he was he did not know what it came packaged. That he does not know the special saucy man.
So I'm on Ozempic, and I recently went into a branch of KFC, and I couldn't eat it because of the Ozempic. And Colonel Sanders was on the wall, and I really felt like he was staring at me, being like, "What happened to my best customer? What's going on?" So yeah, very sad.
It is sad. Okay.
He's there in my heart, literally, because it's clogged.
So the first question here is, thanks for being here tonight. I haven't marked up a book like this in years.
Oh.
This quote is what stays with me. In situations of low stress and safety, mind wandering will be a gift. In high stress, a torment. How can we give ourselves permission to daydream in today's world?
Oh, I know who asked that because she came and spoke to me earlier. Hello. Yeah, so this is a part of the book that really of all the findings in the book, this is the one that most surprised me. So I, very early on in working on the book, I still thought the problem was really in me. So I went away. I was in this weird position. A movie got made out of one of my books, so I had a load of money for the first time in my life. So I thought, screw it, I'm out of here. So I went to Provincetown in Cape Cod for 3 months with no access to the internet. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a laptop that could get online. And my attention got a lot better. You'll be shocked to hear. But a kind of weird thing happened to me, which is I told myself I've come away to focus. I'm going to read a lot. But every day, I would go on these super long walks. And at first, I kind of thought I was cheating because I didn't have anything to listen to or anything. I thought, I didn't come here to do this. I came here to focus more. But weirdly, when I was just mind wandering, which is just when you let your thoughts float, you don't have any object to think about, every day that was the most creatively fertile part of my day. It was weird. I thought, this is weird. And then when I left Provincetown, I looked at, there's a huge amount of science of mind wandering. So we think of mind wandering as a bad thing. If any of you go to parents' evening and they say, well, little Johnny, he mind wanders all the time, that will not be a compliment. Actually, it turns out mind wandering is an incredibly important form of thought. When you let your mind wander, you process and make sense of the past, you anticipate and prepare for the future, and you combine thoughts that would otherwise not be combined, which is where creativity comes from. And we have totally driven mind wandering out of our lives, right? How often do you just do that? Very rarely. So yeah, now, one of the big changes I've made in my life is wherever I am in the world, I will always have 1 hour a day when I leave everything behind except a notebook in case I have any good ideas, and I just go for a walk. And that is almost always the most productive moment of my day, unless I'm really stressed, in which case it can turn into kind of rumination, and then we all know what that's like. So don't do it if I'm really, really stressed, but other than that, I do it, yeah.
Thank you. Also, you talk about the benefits of reading print books versus reading on a screen. What is the research on audiobooks? For some people, that's the only way they enjoy books.
Yeah, so I haven't seen much research on audiobooks. I'd really like to do. We do have research, good research on, there's very simple research. You get the same short story or journalism article or whatever, and you split a group randomly into two. Some of them are given it on printed page, and some of them are given it on a screen. And then you just go back to them a week later, and you just ask them questions about it. And the people who read it on the printed page remember significantly more. I suspect with audiobooks they'd be similar to ebooks, for the simple reason that I know if you're like me, I love audiobooks, but I listen to them while I'm doing something else. I've never just lain on a bed and listened to an audiobook, right, and not done anything else. And we know, I think then you would get the switch cost effect, because you're kind of listening, you are listening, but you're also thinking about something else. Your thoughts are going back and forth. So I suspect you would, no dissing to audiobooks, like I say, I love audiobooks, but I suspect they're less good. Can I tell you about a weird thing that happened with my audiobook? It's the only time in my life I've ever genuinely thought I'd gone mad. When I wrote a book about depression called Lost Connections, And when it came out, I flew as part of the publicity tour from London to Australia. And I couldn't sleep the night before, and I couldn't sleep on the plane. And when I landed, I was just completely like delirious. I was so tired. And I was standing waiting for the car to pick me up. And I suddenly heard my own voice talking about depression, but my lips were not moving. And I genuinely thought, oh, I've lost my mind. I'm having like a psychotic breakdown. What's going on? And then I realized the guy in front of me was listening to the audiobook of my book in his car. And if I'd been more on the ball, I would have like leaned forward and gone, hello. Because can you imagine how weird that would be? Like we're in Australia. And they're like, hello. But he drove off and I just was like, thank God I'm not insane. Yeah, anyway, sorry.
What is your favorite dish?
My favorite dish?
Besides KFC.
So I have a real problem. I am not a food person at all. Like, if I was on death row, my last meal would be a large Big Mac meal and 9 nuggets. So I'm not at all, sorry, I have a real low appreciation of food. So sorry, that's not a very good answer. But Big Mac is Big Mac sauce, a huge tub of Big Mac sauce. Just that on its own. If they killed me by injecting me with that, I'd be very happy to be on death row.
Do you know, is it really just ketchup and mayonnaise and, I mean, or is
Listen,
there
if you're
is there
insulting
something
Big Mac
else?
sauce, I'm walking. Don't commit blasphemy.
Let's see here.